Pseudopod is extruded into this universe from a dimension of purest fear. It's beautiful in its own alien way, but what's to come will unsettle you.
Pseudopod, episode 661 for August 16th, 2019. The Happiest Place, by Kevin Wabunsi.
Lead me to a lonely place, dressed for opening time. Show me bleeding where my love burns you breathing fire.
I'm Alex, co-editor of Pseudopod, your host this week. I'm stepping in this week as Alistair is currently in Dublin as a Hugo finalist for Best Fan Writer. We couldn't be more proud of you, Captain, but in the meantime, rest well and dream of large rockets. Our author this week is Kevin Wabunsi. Kevin is a speculative fiction writer living in Chicago. He is a graduate of the Viable Paradise Writers Workshop, and his fiction has previously appeared in Escape Pod, where he is also an associate editor. He is a Prairie Band Potawatomi. Find his digital footprint in the links in our show notes. The Happiest Place is a Pseudopod original. The story is narrated by John Bell, a former radio guy who has extensive experience in writing, voicing, and producing commercials, audiobooks, video game characters, and so on. Currently, he writes, voices, and produces the comedy podcast Bells in the Bat Free, available at all the links in our show notes. Now, we have a story of laughter, a story of tears, a story of hope, a story of fears. And we promise you, it's true after all.
The living that time hates.
The Happiest Place by Kevin Wabunsi, narrated by John Bell. Everyone knows the edge of the Kingdom of Fun out near the wall is the riskiest place to work. So, of course, that's where they put me on my first day. But it's okay. I've trained for this. I have been thoroughly tested on my knowledge of the rules and the procedures involved. I'm well equipped to handle a shift in Cartoon Town or the Forests of Delight, or, yes, even Magic Main Street. But pulling duty on the street my first time out is really throwing me in the deep end. Magic Main Street is out on the edge, and one of the biggest draws of the Kingdom of Fun. When the Main Street gates swing open, a throng of guests surge through. They're here to listen to the barbershop quartet renditions of familiar top 40 hits and eat butterscotch kettle corn or pumpkin-roasted walnuts or the legendary buttered marshmallow dumplings, all those sweet aromas filling my nostrils. And, of course, they're here to see me and my foam-head compatriots bobble and traipse up and down the bright red cobblestones. No matter how many smiling faces I see, though, I stay on constant alert. Out here, where the razor wire walls are only a few hundred yards away, artfully disguised, of course, and never within the sight lines of a guest, there are some special considerations. I'm not just weaving a magical amusement experience for the guests. I'm also doing my damnedest to protect the guests from what the funventors have termed the unwanted encroachment of reality. So, I keep one eye on the guests and another on the horizon. Out on the edge of the park, there's always the risk of certain reminders of the outside world. For an hour or two, I bobble to and fro, delighting children and adults alike with my exaggerated pantomime. In the middle of my shift, midway through an inspired chicken dance, I catch the faraway sounds of gunfire. No problem. Park maintenance quickly mitigates that with a little bump in the ambient volume. Then larger caliber exchanges trigger the arrival of an impromptu Oompa Band parade. A few minutes later, strange smells arrive on a gentle breeze. Inside my huge foam costume, and at a distance, it's hard to tell exactly what it is. It might be the scent of cremation from a rabid dog cull, or a tire fire wafting across the walls. Through the cartoon dog mask, it smells a little like cloves, actually. Nonetheless, the fun vinters masked that with a little more clever sensory artistry. Hidden nozzles puff out little spritzes of scent. First, lilac breeze and cotton candy, then the big guns, fresh baked cookies. I'm still wobbling and dancing on the cobblestone street when something more troublesome arrives. A smudge of oily smoke rising on the horizon, probably from a burning chemical fire out in the broken zone. That sort of thing isn't really possible to camouflage. Not that there aren't plans in the works. Confidentially, I've been told the fun vinters are working on a huge coordinated balloon release to literally blot out the sky. But that's still in the planning stages. Even as the finger of smoke grows higher and darker, neither me nor any of the other performers are worried about anything actually breaching the walls. The razor wire separating the kingdom of fun from the broken zone outside is tastefully camouflaged, but also lethally electrified. Still, that acrid smoke isn't part of the carefully managed guest experience. Like everything else in the kingdom, the emergency queue is disguised. But as soon as I hear Auld Lang Syne, I know it's a code red situation. That means that I'm one of the performers tasked with discreetly evacuating everyone off the cobblestone paths of the magical Main Street. Trapped inside a giant foam suit, I need to start moving people out of the area. But I mustn't tell the guests what's going on, of course. As one of the big heads, the costume performers with the big foam heads, the delusional frog, the oversized panda bear, and, in my case, the most beloved of them all, the goofball dog, I never, under any circumstances, say a word. All my performance is through exaggerated pantomime, including shepherding the guests towards another zone. My minder guides me. All performers are required to have a minder. Mine wears a bright red circus ringleader costume, giant oversized mustache, and has a voice that carries for miles. He's the one giving me cleverly disguised instructions, masquerading as conversation with the guests. "Kids, does the goofball dog look tired? He looks tired to me. He's just not his usual boisterous, jubilant self. I hope he feels better. He'll need to be 65% peppier to really deliver on the goofball dog promise, don't you think, kids? Even when he's guiding this oh-so-fun conga line out of magical Main Street." I don't really mind the indirect instruction I get from my minder. He's here to watch out for me as much as to watch me. He makes sure I don't trip over a distracted ankle-biter during the parade come evacuation, and he's the one who steers me away from a crowd of rowdy teenagers, the sort fond of kicking goofball dog in the testicles during a distracted moment or trying to tear his oversized head off. That thought sends shivers down my spine. A head removal would, of course, be the most unthinkable occurrence. From day one of Foam Head Boot Camp, it was drilled into me. The guests must never see a performer out of costume, especially not one of the more fantastical creatures with the giant foam heads. Such a trauma would be indelibly burned into the psyches of the impressionable guests. I know the stakes. As I guide my improvised conga line parade/evacuation, I think about what these guests have given up to visit the Kingdom of Fun, how each of them has traveled long and far, how they've braved overland routes through territories rent and broken, where nothing grows and no one lives, and the fabric of reality itself is torn and shredded. In their armor-plated RVs, the guests have journeyed to make their pilgrimage inside the unshakable fantasy reality that the Kingdom of Fun promises. Many of them are veterans of those constant nameless wars, shattered by guilt, of course, but also by the weapons that break apart soldiers' bodies and the ever-thinning fabric of reality alike. I know how desperate those poor souls must be for a wholesome, joyful, innocent escape, untainted by even the hint of the real world. I know how these guests, even as they're dancing/evacuating, are still recovering from the indignity of strip searches and X-rays, backscatter imaging, thorough background checks, and, only occasionally, they assure me, explorations of a more personal nature visited upon those moderate-risk individuals who fall under the suspicion of Kingdom of Fun risk management. It's true that, under the watchful eye of the Kingdom of Fun security detail, some of these very guests I'm guiding stood shivering and naked, forcefully deloused and exfoliated. You can tell from the scattered handful of shaved heads in the crowd. But it's for a greater purpose. The horrors that have been visited upon the outside world must never be allowed to infect, to contaminate the most joyful place on earth. Trailing behind us, never far away, are the Kingdom of Fun's elite security forces, the Fun Patrol. They're probably the best-trained fighting force in the world, but they aren't performers, nor, contrary to their name, are they particularly friendly. Their face masks are a blank expanse of reflective black plastic. The giant rabbit ears are their only nod towards theatricality, and they use live ammo. So, given all the guests have been through, I remain faithful to the precious, nay, sacred duty of presenting the most complete, comprehensive, and unbroken experience. Total immersion in the joyous, innocent fantasy land of the Kingdom of Fun, even while I'm gently pushing guests inward from Magic Main Street to the shaded lanes of the Forests of Delight. It's hard work, but I love this place. Where else in the world do sugar-plum fairies dance across mossy paths, and princesses in white and blue layer-cake castles beckon from the highest tower? Every sight and smell and sound in the Kingdom of Fun is carefully crafted to bring guests, young and old, to a fever pitch of delight and amusement, including, of course, the charming antics of the goofball dog. And they don't even know I'm protecting them from the outside world. It's hot inside the suit, stifling, really. But I never even think of removing the foam head, or even breaking the seal around to let in a little cooler air, even after the evacuation/parade is finished. I know why I must never remove my head in front of a guest. What could be more the antithesis of the perfectly immersive journey into Fantasyland than a goofball dog who decapitates himself in front of toddlers and preschoolers? Or even those adults with a more rudimentary understanding of the blurred border between fantasy and reality. I must not take off any part of my costume, including and especially the head, under any circumstances. I think back to my foam head orientation session. I can still remember that smug fellow, a college graduate from one of the stable provinces, who sneeringly asked about the head removal policy. He posed a hypothetical regurgitation scenario. If, in the unlikely event that there was imminent vomit, that smug fellow said, surely then we would be allowed to remove our heads? I remember the head funventor's response was immediate, forceful, and unambiguous. There were no circumstances, vomit inclusive, that would be grounds for deheading within the park areas. That smug fellow washed out of Foamhead Boot Camp pretty quickly. But I didn't. The Funventors have total faith in me. I've prepared. I, of all people, know what's at stake. I came from outside the walls. I grew up smelling the lilac breeze and cookie dough smells only when they happened to waft outwards when the winds shifted. I picked up the torn pamphlets and discarded memorabilia from the midden heaps outside the security zone with trembling 4-year-old hands. Throughout my childhood, I stared with slack-jawed awe at the pictures of the fairy tale kingdom and the smiling faces and, more than anything else, at those perfectly sculpted cartoon faces of the foam-headed performers. After a 10-minute conga parade, we crossed the border into the overhanging boughs of the Forests of Delight. Only once all my guests are in the shade can I finally relax. The sight and smell of the looming chemical fire can't reach the guests here in the filtered air and artificial canopy of the most delightful forest on earth. I don't stop performing, but it's no longer a code red situation. Even my minder seems to relax a little bit. Growing up out there, of course, I longed to visit. Doesn't everyone? But it was different for me. I didn't just want to experience the fantasy. No, I longed to become a part of the kingdom of fun, to meld into the walls, live my life inside the fantasy. Who wouldn't trade the reality outside for this perfect fantasy? So I don't worry. The fun vinters have total faith in me. But I can't take it for granted. Even after I've delivered my guests to the Forests of Delight, I'm still under the watchful eye of the Fun Patrol. Sure, they prevent contraband from entering the kingdom walls and precious enchanted souvenirs from being pilfered, but most importantly, they ensure no performers ever transgress, break character, or endanger the guests' willing suspension of disbelief. I'm still technically performing the entire time I'm coming off shift after the magic Main Street evacuation, bouncing and bobbling through empty hallways, flapping my arms and gambling around until I'm safely inside the staff dressing room. The all-clear light switches from red to green, and it's only then that I can finally peel off the gigantic novelty gloves, an exaggerated parody of a dog's paw, and hook my fingers under the collar to pull off the giant foam head of Goofball Dog, and I hear the voice of my foam head boot camp sergeant in my memory. "Don't worry if it doesn't come off right away," he'd said. "It takes a little practice to get the movement just right." My fellow performers in the dressing room try to help. They suggest various ways to get the foam head off. "Twist," one of them says. "Just pull," another says. One of them wonders aloud if the Goofball Dog suit is made differently because they've never had any problem getting their shark head off. And right about then, I start to panic a little. I'm pretty sure my actual head is actually stuck inside this oversized novelty dog head. It's getting really stuffy in there, in fact. They call in an apprentice fun venter to help out, and he's even more befuddled than the rest of the staff, who have all stripped out of their costumes, but are watching the apprentice fun venter frown and scowl and harumph at the Goofball Dog head, none of which actually gets it any closer to coming off my sweating head. The apprentice fun venter, I can't see him past the giant oversized novelty dog's snout, is poking and prodding with his fingers and isn't being terribly gentle about it. I ask him to please be more careful when he's poking me in the neck, and he skitters away from me, and he asks me to repeat myself, and I do, and he goes pale. He says he wasn't poking me. His fingers weren't even on my skin. He stops there and grabs the big red emergency phone on the wall of the staff dressing room. I try to tell him that the red phone isn't necessary. It's not an emergency. That sort of drastic action isn't needed. But I stop myself because I worry that I'm starting to sound unbalanced. But who wouldn't, with their head stuck in an oversized foam Goofball Dog mask? A pair of senior fun vinters march into the staff dressing room and order all the other gawking staff out. And then it's just me and the 3 fun vinters, all of whom are staring at me like I'm not even there. They poke and they prod, and eventually their probing fingers start to hurt, and one of them jams his thumb into a tender spot between my collarbone and my voice box, and I tell him to keep his goddamn hands to himself. They all back away, and I start to sputter an apology. That's not how a diligent Kingdom of Fun employee would react. That's certainly not in keeping with the head funventor's dictates for fantasy making and general decorum. The junior funventor whispers into the ear of one of his superiors, and I don't catch all of what he says, but I hear "happening again." And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that means they've dealt with this before, that there's an easy solution. Then the Fun Patrol arrives. At gunpoint, I'm encouraged to submit to a calming injection and lie down on a stretcher they've brought with them. I'm strapped down, and with no warning, I'm wheeled, rushed, it seems like, through the bowels of the Kingdom of Fun. All I see is unmarked hallways and overhead lights flickering past until they blend together into a smear of light. We take an endless elevator ride down, so very far down. I didn't even know the Kingdom of Fun had sublevels this deep below the ground. The sedative starts to take effect as they wheel me through an endless stretch of bare concrete hallway. I turn my head and see we're passing by dozens of rooms honeycombed into the earth. Storage, it looks like. Dozens of foam-headed suits in cold storage hanging from the ceiling. At first, it's all the familiar characters that I've loved and adored since childhood, multiple copies of each costume. Then, in the depths of those shrouded rooms, I see characters I've never seen, never even heard of. A rat with spiral eyeballs, a googly-eyed plant with row after row of thorns and endless flytrap mouths, something like a squid with adorable doe eyes and a mouthful of glistening cartoon tentacles idly twitching and twirling. As I drift into unconsciousness, I finally feel calm. The Kingdom of Fun is going to take care of me. I just know it. I trust the fun vendors. The kingdom has faith in me, and I have faith in the kingdom.
Kevin had this to say about his story. A certain mouse-themed theme park has always been an object of fascination for me, and the more I read about it, the more strange an imitation of reality it appears to be. The lengths that employees are required to go to create a seamless fantasy experience for their guests seems altogether dystopian, and it didn't take too much tweaking to imagine a world where such a place was altogether disturbing. I wanted to think about the folks inside the costumes in such a strange place. How far would a person go to become a participant in this fantasy land? More worrisome, how far would the fantasy land go to keep its hold on them? We don't have to look far. In 2003, scientists from the United States translated the song "It's a Small World" into a series of DNA segments 150 base pairs long, inserted them into tiny monsters, and demonstrated they could still retrieve it 100 bacterial generations later. We're not too far from having portions of the Mouse House CRISPR'd into our Dole Whip. And that's just the beginning. Thoughts of foam mascots and happy songs also bring to mind the weird Banana Splits movie that came out this week. As of the time I'm recording this, I haven't had the opportunity to watch it, but I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with this merry band of characters. Maybe this is the real reason why the indoor amusement park, The World of Sid and Marty Krofft, was closed after just 6 months. Rather than the publicly presented excuse of poor attendance, or the politically presented excuse of poor location and urban decay. The set and costume designs of Sid and Marty Krofft are worthy of all the nightmares this will spawn. It's not a big step to move from my first childhood slashers, the Sleestacks with their menacing stroll, to putting a hatchet in the hands of Fleagle. I don't know who is managing the Hanna-Barbera intellectual property rights right now, but they're killing it. I just finished the graphic novel Exit Stage Left, The Snagglepuss Chronicles. This collection opens up with Snagglepuss delivering flip responses during the McCarthy inquest hearing, and that hooked me. Part Oscar Wilde, part Tennessee Williams, this portrayal of a gay playwright during the Red and Lavender scares was far more dramatic than I was expecting considering the source material. If you want to provide an accessible primer on these, plus Nixon, Khrushchev, the Cuban Revolution, and Stonewall, you couldn't ask for a better book. I wish I had this in high school when learning portions of those conflicts, minus the more scandalous bits that decorum kept off the syllabus. Although, the overt gay themes and subtle furry themes would keep this out of most temples of learning. Subversion is a major theme throughout, and the applicability of the lessons to our current news cycle is present for those willing to look. Applicability never supersedes maintaining the period and the presented plot. It is a melodrama, but that's appropriate considering the omnipresent stage plays throughout. The ending really drove everything home, and I'm going to spoil the denouement. This collection is some of the best retcon I have ever read. The Quick Draw McGraw show first aired in the fall of 1959, and, presented here, it was a way for actors and writers crushed by the McCarthy blacklist to be able to return to creative endeavors. A similar-looking orange mountain lion known as Snaggletooth first appeared in this show without collar or cuffs. Those in the know would be able to see the wink to the playwright Snagglepuss, and if the censors got angry, the showrunners could just wring their hands and claim they were deceived. If no one took action, Snagglepuss could re-enter the world without the mask. Snagglepuss appeared in his own series of shorts in 1961, becoming a regular segment on the Yogi Bear Show featuring in a total of 32 episodes. So this collection is more than a tawdry way to cash in on nostalgia. It is incredibly well scripted to fit within the cartoons that filled up weekday afternoons and Saturday mornings. This is a fascinating lens through which we can be presented a history lesson and a morality tale, even if it is a Pollyanna-ish story of art conquers all adversity. Speaking of adversity, the original paraphernalia for the Flash Fiction Contest had been lost long ago, and the black box now resting on the stool had been put into use even before Old Man Stewart, the oldest man in town, was born. Mr. Lieberman spoke frequently to the forum members about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. There was a story that the present box had been made with some pieces of the box that had preceded it, the one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. Mr. Garrett and his oldest daughter Victoria hold the black box securely on the stool until Mr. Lieberman can stir the papers thoroughly with his hand. Because so much of the ritual had been forgotten or discarded, Mr. Lieberman had been successful in having slips of paper substituted for the chips of wood that had been used for generations. Chips of wood, Mr. Lieberman had argued, had been all very well when the village was tiny, but now that the population was more than 300 and likely to keep on growing, it was necessary to use something that would fit more easily into the black box. The 6th incarnation of the Escape Artists Flash Fiction Contest is coming. Pseudopod is leading the charge again. Every author may submit one original story of 500 words or less for consideration. Submissions are open now until August 31st. Head to our special submittable portal for the Flash Fiction Contest to exercise your civic duty in the lottery. The competition will begin in October. The 3 winning stories will be purchased and run as an episode of Pseudopod. Payment will be $40, so this will be considered a SIFWA qualified pro-rate sale under the new rates. Check out the website for rules and details. While you're there, click on Feed the Pod to subscribe. Lots of speculative fiction outlets are currently working to raise funds to meet the new professional rate set by SIFWA, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. Starting September 1st, the rate is going up from 6 cents a word to 8 cents, even though it's still lower than writers deserve. Escape Artists is entirely donation funded, so we need your help to pay writers this better rate for both regular stories and the winners of the Flash Fiction Contest. and to help us maintain our status as an organization that pays professional rates. Pseudopod is a part of Escape Artists Incorporated and is distributed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Theme music is by permission of Anders Manga. Pseudopod knows the clown is a joke to everyone, except the clown.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.